All right. All right. Can anyone see my screen? All right. Awesome. Well, thank you for bearing with, for sticking around for another whirlwind tour of another Section 6 funded rare plant project. This is an experimental reintroduction of Ben Lomond Wallflower. And if you heard the last talk about cypress, maybe the overlap is kind of teeing up and talking about rare plant introductions in response to declines and also the CZU fire. So there'll be a little bit of continuation. I want to again start off with acknowledgements of the huge team of people who worked on this project, which was also funded by a Section 6 grant arranged by Terrace and Todd and funded through the Santa Cruz Mountains Bioregional Council. We had a lot of CDFW staff as well as JMC staff and interns working on this project. So thank you everyone for all the hard work. I do want to acknowledge too that this project, it was a kind of phase 2 of a prior Section 6 funded project with a collaborator, Justin Woodall from Santa Clara University. And I'll be talking about that project as well. So thanks to everyone who worked on that and contributed to the successful effort there. So I'm going to be talking about the Santa Cruz Wallflower, I might say cypress a few times, so apologize in advance, introduction of the Bonny Doon Ecological Reserve and steps that can be hopefully used to promote wallflower and other rare plants elsewhere. So as many of you know, a lot of anthropogenic factors are causing rare plant extirpations, as we just heard about with cypress. And in some cases, introductions are going to be needed to ensure long-term persistence of these species. And to be successful, these introductions must address factors that influence population persistence. And some or all factors, unfortunately, are poorly understood. So this necessitates experimental research and approaches to filling those data gaps. So here's just some of the introduction considerations that have to be kept in mind. You got to get the right abiotic habitat. You got to have the biotic factors in play, including pollinators. You need to understand disturbance regimes, which are really important in the sandhills, and population factors like mating systems and genetic considerations are all really important. So if you're not familiar with sandhills, quick primer. Sandhills are a unique community of plants and animals found only in central Santa Cruz County. They have 2 endemic plant communities, silverleaf manzanita chaparral, which I'll call sand chaparral today, and maritime Coast Range ponderosa pine forests, or which we'll call sand parkland, because those are mouthfuls. And these communities support diverse species, assemblages, plants, and insects, as well as other animals. And they're including 6 endemic species that are found nowhere else in the world, shown here. Sandhills are adapted to or prone to disturbance. Fire functions at a large spatial scale to maintain open habitat conditions. The precise aspect of the fire regime are largely unknown. At a small spatial scale, we have a lot of sandy soils that are subject to a lot of soil displacement due to slides like erosion, trails, gopher mounds. And these disturbances promote native plants by reducing the litter and competition, and reducing exotic plants kind of knocks them back and stimulates seed germination. So the sandhills are really naturally rare, about 62 or 6,300 acres historically, we think, and then we're down to about less than 4,000 acres, and that includes developed areas like this neighborhood here, so that still support some species. So in terms of intact habitat, it's like less than 3,000 acres, and they've been decreased by degraded and impacted by a lot of factors, including climate change, which is taking its toll on a lot of the rare species, as well as habitat degradation. So Ben Lomond Wallflower is probably the most acutely affected by those factors. It is Erythrumum tortifolium and the Brassicaceae. It's a biennial to short-lived perennial herb. So it's generally monocarpic, which means it might take a couple years to get around to it, but it generally reproduces once and then dies. It's endemic to the Santa Cruz sandhills, so it's only found in the sandhills. It's because of that, partly because of that, state listed as endangered in 1981 and federally listed as endangered in 1994. It's also a CRPR 1B plant. Some work by Justin Woodall and Miranda Mellon and others have found that it has a weakly self-incompatible mating system, which means you can have some self-fertilization occurs, but not very much. And it also has late-acting inbreeding depression, which means that self-pollinated offspring generally have lower survivorship and reproduction. And that the plant preferentially occurs in open canopy, bare ground areas. Fire maintains those, soil disturbances maintain those as well. And it's outcompeted by exotic plants in a big way. Most seedlings, even in good conditions, die before reaching the juvenile stage. So we have quite the bottleneck to get to reproduction. And then when they do flower to try to reproduce, the deer like to browse most of the inflorescences, and that takes its toll as well. Some documented work with the CNDDB database suggests that about 5 of the 17 populations documented since 1970s have been extirpated. So we're losing wallflower populations, and that is the case in the Bonny Doon Ecological Reserve, which is a CDFW reserve. It's 552 acres. It has very high conservation value for sandhills. It was protected in 1989 by the Nature Conservancy. Prior to that, it was proposed as a vineyard and had undergone a fair amount of clearing. It's now managed by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's got 2 wallflower populations associated with some old unpaved roads. The northern one here was extirpated in around 1994. The southern one is down here, is just holding on, and with fewer than 20 adults since about 2013. So that's the backdrop we're setting up against. In 2018 to 2020, as I mentioned, my collaborator Justin Whittle and I worked with Terrace and others to design and implement an experimental introduction at the Bonny Doon Ecological Reserve, which was designed to address some study questions like what soil treatments can we use to establish wallflower, or what genetic aspects of the introduction do we need to keep in mind, and what habitat conditions are going to be most effective. Our goals were to determine how to manage disturbance, figure out if the Bonny Doon Ecological Reserve population has locally adapted genetic complexes, meaning like there's important genetic uniqueness there that is essential to maintaining the population there, or assess whether alleviating inbreeding depression, which is likely going on due to the small population size, could help promote plant fitness and population growth. We also wanted to determine suitable habitat conditions. Where can we get this plant growing in Bonny Doon? And finally, we wanted to just get it going in more places than one. So the way we went about this was with a small scale experiment. It was implemented in 2 years, 2019 and 2020, was monitored for each study was monitored for 2 years. And then we had 8 blocks in 2 different community types, the chaparral and the parkland that I mentioned earlier. So 4 blocks in each. There were 2 disturbance treatments. We did some plots, we just went in and raked the material off the soil surface, like the established herbaceous plant community. And then in other plots, the tilled plot, we call them, we raked and then we turned over all the soil painstakingly with shovels to kind of create nice, loose, deeper, fluffy soil conditions. This is the block design. We had 2 replicate plots in each block, plus a third one that we didn't seed or plant. That we did those to see if there was a seed bank out there. We did not see anything come up in any of those, so I won't talk about those plots anymore. The plot size was 4 meters squared, so 2 meter by 2 meter. We had some seed that we sowed in the middle, and we had a bunch of outplanted seedlings of different genetic treatments on the perimeter. So the genetic treatments were determined to be the crosses of non-Bonny Doon populations. That's non-Bonny Doon by non-Bonny Doon, a non-Bonny Doon non-cross, a Bonny Doon cross with a non-Bonny Doon, and Bonny Doon only. So those are the genetic treatments. Let's see, we collected a lot of habitat in each of those 2 years, or excuse me, a lot of data. For habitat, we looked at soil depth, texture, chemistry, set out soils for different nutrient availability. We did plant community composition sampling, every species, then we aggregated those data for looking at cover by different guilds and richness as well. And we also wanted to look at Ben Lomond spineflower and Ben Lomond buckwheat, which are 2 other co-occurring rare species that are found in the sandhills. For wallflower, we took a demographic approach where we looked at plants based on their establishment, survivorship, reproduction, and seed production. These kind of metrics can help you understand population persistence. And what did we find? So in that study, rolling through it, up here we have establishment. I got year 1 and year 2. Green is till, gray is rake. So in short, we found that the tilling the soil promoted the survivorship, I'll show you that one, of wallflower. So we got basically plants got bigger, as I'll show you, and they also survived at higher rates. And only in year one, though, that we didn't see that result in the second year. And we had higher reproduction and also higher seed production, although the last one wasn't statistically significant because there was not enough plants, 0, in the rake plots that reproduced. So tilling had a beneficial effect on those seed plots where we seeded the plants. How about the transplanted seedlings? I'll just roll through it just to tell you that same benefit we saw, or different benefits, but same overall effect. Tilling promoted survivorship of the outplanted seedlings and also promoted reproduction. And then seed production, though, was unaffected by the tilling treatment. So what's the mechanism? How is tilling benefiting wallflower? I'm always interested to hear people's ideas. I have mine. We certainly saw some evidence for competition reduction. The raking treatment did not reduce competitors quite as much as the tilling did. And you can see wallflower. This is the 2 years in the first year study. You can see the till plants were much larger from the second census. And that, so plant size definitely factored into it. And you can see conversely that the raking plots, the gray, had more cover all over time. And we saw a negative correlation between wallflower size and exotic plant cover. We also saw a negative correlation between wallflower size and native cover. So some of the natives are actually having potentially competitive effects. So it's definitely a competition story, but it's not just a competition story. There's something else about the soil that's tilled that's beneficial, because even in plots that had very little competition, the tilling plots still did better. And we see that over and over again. And we did not detect anything with soil nutrients. A lot of times you can think, oh, soil nutrients are promoted by some of these sort of disturbance factors. We did not detect that in this study. It seems like something else maybe about that. Either we didn't detect it or there's something else about soil looseness that really benefits wallflower. It could be root penetration, access to obviously more water and soil nutrients if you have deeper roots. Okay, what about the genetic treatment? So just I'll briefly go over these results. So performance varied by life stage and year. So this Bonny Doon, non-Bonny Doon, it was really very variable, and there was not consistent evidence for any kind of local adaptation. So there wasn't a scenario where the Bonny Doon genotype just did consistently better. We also didn't see any inbreeding depression where the crosses always did better, nor did we see any evidence for outbreeding depression where the crosses would do worse if you cross them with non-Bonny Doon or non-similar genotype. The hybrid genotype, where Bonny Doon was crossed with non-Bonny Doon, had higher performance in 5 out of 7 measures, including survivorship. So that provides some weak evidence for maybe some heterosis, which is where non-closely related individuals, their offspring do better. So let's see, what about habitat conditions? We did a fair amount of multivariate analysis of habitat conditions to try to figure out whether soil factors and plant community composition factors, how those interacted with wallflower. I will say that we did get wallflower preferentially doing better in areas of lower soil fertility. So there was definitely a variation in soil fertility out there, and the worse off the soil, the better the wallflower. That's largely because that's also where the exotic plants did worse. So really, wallflower benefits from good soil fertility just like other plants, but it can't hack it with a competition. So we did get wallflower established in all 8 of our block locations, and we saw that wallflower performance varied amongst the blocks. So you can see like low and colorimetric scale here, brown, bad, green, good. You can see the different wallflower metrics here. These are the different blocks, and what jumps out at you probably is that you have some blocks that had really low establishment but had really high survivorship, and then conversely, other blocks had really low establishment, or excuse me, high establishment, lower survivorship and reproduction. So it could be that those factors it could be some, self-thinning that could have gone on, but it could also be, it seems more likely that these different habitat conditions are interacting with wallflowers' different stages to influence performance, which makes it really hard to pick one place to introduce. So we recommended, based on that study, that you use a soil disturbance treatment, soil tilling. We don't know how it works, but it works really well, at least in the short term, to generate nice, loose, fluffy conditions. For genetics, the recommendation was that genetic mixing is unlikely to disrupt the local adaptation that was up there. We also were down to just a few individuals up there, so the decision was made to go ahead and use non-Bonny Doon genotypes in future introductions up there. and hope that that can promote fitness by reducing self-incompatibility. And finally, the habitat conditions, because it was such a mix of responses, we recommend establishing Wallflower in a mix of conditions that can interact with the different weather and different conditions. But overall, pick areas that don't have a lot of exotic plants, which is a no duh. So yeah, other things we learned from that study were that outplanting can jumpstart or even give like a head start to the introduction. Transplants often flowered in their first year, which really reduces mortality over the summer. And we also recommend that having a larger treatment area would be more beneficial. We had a lot of herbivory in the plots, which is not something we normally see in wallflower populations elsewhere. So suspect that that was taking its toll. Also, exotic plants recolonize from the untreated area, so having bigger treatment areas is better to reduce those edge effects. And then finally, Ben Lomond Spineflower and Ben Lomond buckwheat also did really well in the plots in response to both treatments. So it's not like a single species management thing we're looking at. These good news is that these species are also adapted to disturbance and do really well. Let's see, we keep an eye on these plots. We're not still monitoring them, but Terrace goes back, I go back periodically. Wallflowers persisted in 6 of the blocks, experimental areas since 2018. The 2 locations where it's blinked out are the weediest, the sand parkland, really grassy blocks. And this is good news though, because we had a multi-year drought in there, and we also had the CZ lightning fire suppression issue where the dozer drove through part of our experimental area. And we also borrowed a lot of seed for the next phase, which I'm going to talk about. So, and the other good news is that wallflower kind of started seeping out of the plots, which we had caged in a couple of blocks. So in 2 blocks, we have wallflower dispersing and kind of doing its own thing in the occurrences. So that's good news. That good news kind of led us to seek with this new Section 6 grant that was also looking at the CZU and Cypress to kind of scale this up. We wanted to get more wallflower out there. This is the site right after the CZU, or the fall after, it was probably November. And you can see lots of open sandy soil, looks really good for a disturbance adapted plant, right? So we basically started this new study where we wanted to establish wallflower in the burned area. Some local residents had created a fuel break through the ecological reserve in response to try to suppress the fire or to contain the fire. That looked really good too. We thought, wouldn't this be a great chance to promote wallflower? So we're trying to scale up this introduction. So beginning in 2022, this is a map showing our sort of natural experiment, which has some issues, so we want to keep those in mind. We have the burn area over here, 15 plots where we establish wallflower, and then you have the fuel break over here. So they're in different habitats, different locations, different starting point. So we won't be talking about what fire did and what the fuel break did. We'll just talk about what happened in the burned area and what happened in the fuel break. So keep that in mind. But when we got out there, by the time we got the grant and got out there to do the introduction, this is what the fuel break looked like in August 2022. It kind of started growing back in, no longer looked nice, loose and fluffy, good for wallflower. So CDFW and I made the decision to refresh the fuel break, which also creates kind of a disconnect between the burn area, but that's what we did. So in September 2022, we went out and CDFW drove a little tractor jobber out there and created this fuel break so that we could freshly into freshly disturbed soil. So yeah, what did that look like? In fall 2022, we held back 25% of our seed for overseeding the subsequent year because it was supposed to be a La Nina year. Ha ha ha, ended up being like the wettest year ever. But who knew? Anyway, we monitored in 2023, and we noticed that there was kind of not some loose, fluffy conditions and not as much establishment, or the plants were really small. So we decided that was probably more tilling needed to be done to try to get this thing on track. So we thought we would just basically complicate our lives in our experiment by tilling half of each subplot. So these 2 meter by 8 meter plots, we divided in half. We carefully avoided all the actual wallflowers that were in there because there were still wallflowers, of course. Flagged those, avoided those, turned over all the soil, and then overseeded the entire plot. So both sides got reseeded, but only 1/2 got tilled. Okay, so that creates for some fun stats you can read about in the report. But yeah, so then we monitored in a lot of same data as the prior study, Wallflower by age class, size class, looked at herbivory explicitly this time. These flags are all just showing you kind of how we go out there and census every plant, so we can kind of understand what's going on. Here's some photos before I jump into some wordy data. You can see the burned areas up on top versus the fuel break down below. The burned area was varied from very open and sandy and really great conditions, lots of flags, lots of plants, to high subshrub establishment, more in the interior. And so not as many plants as you can see. Fuel break also varied quite a bit from really pretty sparsely vegetated, and most of that most of the plants you see there are exotic grasses, unfortunately, and to very dense and unfortunately very unsuitable grassy habitat. Let's see. First of all, I'll talk about the soil depth, since that was a key thing. Soil depth we measure with a kind of a soil probe. It was definitely refreshing the fuel break in 2022 seemed to reduce the soil depth. We measured before and after, and we kind of basically compacted the soil by using that tractor. So that was a little bit of a learning lesson to think about with heavy equipment out there, not totally surprised for those of you who work with heavy equipment. Exotic cover was much higher in the fuel break compared to the burn area. We saw that in both years, as I just showed you in the pictures. And again, this is not because the fuel break promoted exotics. This is they occur in two different habitats, although there is some potential that the burn would have incinerated more seed than obviously the fuel break. So there is probably a little bit of a treatment effect and a lot of location effect. We didn't see any effect of tilling on exotic plant cover. Native plant cover was much higher in the burn area than in the fuel break. So saw that in both years, and also tilling didn't affect natives. And Ben Lomond spineflower and Ben Lomond buckwheat both had greater cover in the fuel break than the burn area, but that's again because that's where they occurred. So what else do we find? Wallflower performance. Okay, so establishment, that's the percent of seeds that produce a seedling, was 4 times higher in the burn area than the fuel break. So we got a lot more, 4.4% versus 1%. And overall, though, those rates were really low compared to our first study, where we had 68 and 27% establishment. So not sure exactly what happened. Could be because we censused 3 months later, which we missed some recruits, but also could be because seed viability might have declined during the year that we stored the seed. So establishment was positively correlated with soil depth. However, so we saw more establishment in the deeper plots. The tilling did not enhance establishment, which is kind of surprising and a bummer since we expected that benefit. And it was negatively correlated with exotic plant cover. So the more exotic plants we had out there, the fewer wallflower we got. Survivorship is the percent of plants established in 2023 that survived to 2024. And we found that that tended to be lower in the burn area than the fuel break, much lower. But that wasn't statistically significant, but it was still noticeably dramatic. There was a positive association with soil moisture in the fuel break. So we had some moisture plots that tended to promote high wallflower survivorship. In fact, we had one plot that had 100% of the plants survive. So soil moisture does seem to be limiting, as we would expect. So survivorship was negatively associated with native cover. There was some competition from those subshrubs in the burn area. And they also tend to harbor small mammals that browse wallflower. So here's a normal wallflower juvenile, and here's one that has been browsed down to nothing. And I think that this really underestimates the effect of herbivory on wallflower, because I think we don't see all of them. I think they eat some that we don't even detect. And so there was likely a fair amount of more wallflower or mortality due to that to small mammals. Survivorship was generally higher than in our prior study, however, so that was good news. So reproduction, we got 4.4% of the wallflowers we produced. This is higher than our prior study, so that was some good news. It was similar in the burn area and fuel break, and the tilt, we didn't have a lot of reproduction, so it's hard to statistically compare some of this stuff, but it was twice that in the tilled area than the control. Unfortunately, the deer browse a lot of the wallflower. We didn't cage them because we were trying to scale up and trying not to just cage everything out there, but the deer browsed all but I think this one adult, unfortunately. So what do we find? So establishment was higher in the burned area, likely due to reduced exotic plants and looser soil. Survivorship was lower in the burned area, though, due to herbivory. as I mentioned just now, and then seedling mortality took a toll with desiccation stress. The soil texture and chemistry is probably different in that chaparral that burned too, but we don't have good data for that in this study. The chaparral tends to be sandier, lower organic matter, and have lower cation exchange capacity, which is a kind of a good measure for nutrient availability. So as of 2024, we went back out and checked the plots. Terrace and I did a couple weeks ago. Wallflower is present in 26% of the original 30 plots, 2024. 26% of the plots. There's about 1,300 individuals last spring and about 230 juveniles that could flower this year. Went out and checked the plots last couple weeks ago. There was a new cohort of seedlings observed, so that's exciting. We do have seed dormancy and some ongoing recruitment, which is encouraging. But overall, I think I'm a little concerned. Here's a comparison between 5 years post-fire. You can see that the habitat is closing in very rapidly, except for along the trail. And I'm not sure that this is going to stay good wallflower habitat. So yeah, what do? Wallflower, unfortunately, in Bonny Doon, I hate to be so dismal today. I feel like I've been delivering a lot of bad news. Has been a population that's going to remain on the brink of extirpation. I think more can and should be done. There's been fewer than 50 plants total, including fewer than 20 plant adults for over 10 years in the naturally recruiting population. I think the introductions have helped establish wallflower, but the introductions seem to be declining. They don't seem to be maintaining themselves with a loss of a couple of them, and then the numbers seem down as well. The causes are numerous, but probably include a lack of ongoing disturbance. So wallflower just really needs something to maintain open loose sand soil and keep the exotics at bay, keep the habitat open, free from herbivory. I do think that herbivory from deer is also taking a toll with the species throughout the range. I know people tend to think, oh, it's deer, it's natural, but they're at naturally high numbers, and they do have an incremental effect. And climate change induced desiccation stress is exacerbating the desiccation caused by exotics. So these species probably just didn't adapt to have quite dry, quite as hot conditions. If you look at wallflowers populations, this is an insolation layer, which is a kind of can be used as a surrogate for where it's hottest and driest. You can see Bonny Doon up there on top of Ben Lomond Mountain is a pretty hot, dry microsite, gets a lot of sun. And compared to some of the other wallflower populations. So where wallflowers persisted up there is in the shade of some tall forest nearby. So what can we do? Recommendations are still keep trying to maintain persistence of this population. Some of this information is being used in other populations as well, so it's really helpful. Continue to contage plants to maintain, to prevent herbivory. Use disturbances to maintain open habitat. I think, we've been toying with the idea of trying to use trails and actively manage trails as a way to do that. And then continue to introduce wallflowers in areas that, for whatever reason, are going to maintain open sandy soil in a variety of conditions. So with that, you guys have survived 2 rapid fire talks. Thank you so much. I will stop sharing and take any questions folks have.
Hi, Terrace. Sorry. I just wanted to, I don't have a question per se at this point, but definitely just wanted to thank everybody for partnerships on this, and Santa Cruz Bioregional Council and Jodi, you guys all went above and beyond doing this. And as with all studies, they lead to more questions, and you actually went down the rabbit hole a couple times. So we do appreciate the extra work that you've done and collaboration. And I hope that we can continue to move forward as partners and all land managers in the Santa Cruz Mountains to try to keep answering these questions and recover these plants. So thanks again.
Thanks, Terrace, the voice of Terrace. Yeah, Brian.
Hey, yeah, thanks so much. I'm curious about the potential success of transplanting, relocating, this active approach to stewardship, which I guess in some contexts is controversial. I'm not sure how we decide, but I guess to what extent should we as a owner of a variety of Sandhills properties be looking towards outplanting and other facilitated relocation or enhancement of populations? Is there consensus that this is the right way to go? Super big picture, hard to generalize, I'm sure, but if that's I'm just trying to figure out which way to lean on this, deferring to all of your expertise.
Yeah, I'll say that I think it's like I won't say it. It's a last resort, I guess it was a fairness. It's not what you do first. It's not this is not what we all want to jump in and do, right? I think, we tried, and Terrace can speak to this more since she's been doing the work on the ground. Caging to prevent herbivory was tried for quite a bit of time in Bonny Doon before the introduction idea finally started being discussed. And I think a lot of the wallflower populations that are big enough, just doing that, caging, weeding, those things can be sufficient. For whatever reason, Bonny Doon, that we're still trying to wrap our head around, Bonny Doon just seems to be in a difficult decline that's kind of hard to get out of. So I do think, philosophically, I think that was more of a philosophical question. I don't know. It is not, it can be very expensive, very time intensive, and certainly managing natural populations would be my bias towards their maintenance. But then when, I do think that climate change, 20 years from now, I would never have thought I would be saying this, but like climate change has dealt us a whole new hand. And I don't think that it's going to be enough to just say, oh, it's natural and anymore. Unfortunately, we just need to figure out and address the things that are most limiting population persistence and go after them, the ones that are most manageable. That's my bias. That's my take.
Thanks very much.
Looks like Nicole, who worked on this project quite a bit, didn't want to speak up. She put in the chat, what do we recommend for additional efforts to scale up Wallflower? Well, yeah, so we have been using large-scale heavy equipment over in the Quail Hollow Quarry conservation areas with Granite Rock has been using that, and that's definitely, we're monitoring that carefully there. I do think the heavy equipment thing is something that might work, but I really think it's all about something that maintains ongoing loose soil conditions. And that's where I'm thinking recreation is probably a challenging thing to manage, but maybe there's something to be looked at there where historically these areas were maintained open by unmanaged recreation. And so maybe we need to look back to I'm not saying the Jeep trails and the motorbikes yet, but maybe something that is more manageable that can maintain open, loose, fluffy soil on kind of a rotating basis is something that's kind of where my head's currently thinking, but I'm interested in other ideas. Maybe Rafika.
Hi, yeah, Rafika from
Sorry.
CDFW. No worries. I had two questions, and one was just thinking about like what might make the tilled soil more beneficial. And I assume you took soil moisture measurements, but I wondered if you had any like soil moisture probes out there
We
continuously.
don't have them out continuously. We did do spot measurements, and I'm going to look at Angelica because she's got the report open. Maybe I don't think with soil moisture was higher in tilled versus untilled, but I don't remember seeing a signature for that. But having them out there, what are you thinking, that the soil moisture is too wet when it's not tilled, or what do you think?
I have no idea. I was wondering if just the fluffier soil somehow can maybe draw in more moisture and retains it, and I don't remember if you said it was drier or moister.
Yeah, I don't think it was actually significantly different in the tilled and untilled in this study. Yeah, it wasn't. Angela's confirming my memory. Yeah. So yeah, I think Wendy Silver, UC Berkeley, once told me maybe it's oxygen. They need oxygen, but she works in the tropics. Not to diss Wendy, and I'm like, I'm not sure they need oxygen. I think they need water. But it is something to think about. Like, we don't really know. It could be oxygen in the early season when we had the 2023 was very wet, as we know, and the plants were very small. And I kept thinking, like, are they getting like enough oxygen? Is it like the water could have just kept it so saturated that there was not enough, oxygen for respiration in the soil?
Yeah, and then my other question, and you touched on it a little bit, but I wondered, like, historically, what was maintaining these open spaces? And as the shrubland, is it entirely native plant shrubland, or are there some exotics in there that have also changed the habitat?
Yeah, so I think the answer is twofold. At the large spatial scale, probably fire was coming through and kind of keeping shrubs and trees. You can see the picture behind me. This is pretty helpful. I'll have the wallflower of the wallflower. Excuse me, wallpaper of the wallflower. Shrubs and trees kind of maintained by fire, and then steep slopes. Like this site here is a wallflower haven. It's the largest population remaining, south ridge of Quail Hollow Quarry conservation areas. And it's because it's got some really steep slopes naturally that just erode constantly. And so that ongoing erosion is what maintains nice open conditions. I do think that they've probably had to contract to the refugia. Those keep the exotics out too. So before exotics, it could have been a very different playing field where maybe wallflower wasn't as restricted, and then now these areas of active disturbance, but they seem to benefit from them. It can also just be the refuge from ongoing competition. Yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like there's a couple more comments in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like, are we going back to Cypress? I'm happy to do that. Oh, wait, no.
For tilling, has a Lawson aerator been considered?
No, a Lawson aerator has not been considered. Does Marielle want to enlighten us? Marielle, sorry. No? Okay, I'll look into Lawson area. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I was trying to find my mute. Yeah, it's just a consideration. This is just mostly for my rangeland days. The USDA Great Basin Rangeland Research Unit, I worked on a couple projects where they used a Lawson aerator to reduce the impacts of tilling, but it provided the shrub management that was needed. Obviously, I don't really know if this would be the right tool to use for this area, but I thought that was interesting. I guess in comparison to just regular tilling tools. So yeah.
Cool. I'll look into it. Thanks. Other questions, comments? And if you've had questions from this, we're obviously over time, so please leave if you need to leave. But if you had questions or anything about the Cypress, comments, not just questions, comments about the Cypress, I'd be interested in those as well.
There's one more comment about cypress here. So maybe 4% viability of the cypress seed would negate this comment, but any viability to makes me wonder if removing dead snags with seed and putting those snag carcasses in areas with potential habitat could help recruitment. Just thought.
I can take the seeds themselves and not take the whole carcass. It'd be a little easier.
A little easier.
Unless I'm missing something, Sarah. I don't know. Maybe you think that there's like a nurse plant thing or something that could happen with the carcass, the snag, if you will. But yeah, it's definitely been something that I've been thinking about is like some mediated dispersal of cypress cones with seed is on my mind. Just because we have a lot of, apparently suitable habitat that won't stay that way for very long. So essentially suitable for the regeneration niche. And once they get established, they can obviously handle a little bit more.
Yeah, I was just thinking, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Sarah, I guess I was just thinking kind of like, with a carcass, there's a bit of a nursery, like you were saying, to keep it a little cooler, a little, something to kind of help that process, maybe a little wetter. I don't know, but yeah.
It probably traps moisture from the air
right.
and keeps down on it. No, I love it. No, I will put it in a plug. It's like you go out and see the cypress. Those of you who've been out there, you see all this down wood and you see all these shrubs. And I do think we all need to kind of like, we are worried about fire. We're worried about too frequent fire and stuff coming back. But with these fuels can have facilitative effects that I think you just hearken to, and I'm very mindful of. And I know there's been, I haven't heard it here today, but people have been pinging me about we got to go in and remove all the shrubs, we got to open it up, or we got to thin the cypress themselves. That comes up quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know about the thinning the cypress themselves. They seem to do that themselves. But as far as the shrubs, they, I do think that there is potential for some nurse plant action going on too, and we just have to be really careful of that stuff. So anyway, just wanted to put a plug in for that for people considering the implications of this for fuel management. It all needs to be done very, very careful, thoughtful, and I guess experimentally with hopefully a lot of monitoring. So.
Okay, well, in the interest of time, we are about 20 minutes over. Wanted to thank everybody for coming and staying longer with all the questions. Appreciate that. And eventually, Jodi, you'll share the final document with all of us so we can review that. And then we've recorded this as well, so that will be available at some point somewhere. So, all right, and we'll call it. Thank you all.